think mediation is just for messy divorces or corporate lawsuits? Think again. Today's guest has helped hundreds of families, couples, and workplaces turn conflict into clarity. If you've ever dealt with tension at home, at work, or with someone you love, this conversation is going to give you a new perspective. I'm Tracy Mullen, and today I'm joined by Tiago Campos, founder of The Way Mediation. He's been a trusted mediator in Durham and the GTA for over 12 years, working with families, couples, communities, and organizations to resolve conflict with compassion. Whether you're navigating a separation, workplace friction, or just want more harmony in your life, Tiago's insights are powerful and practical. Welcome, Tiago.
Wow. Thank you, Tracy. Thank you for having me. That is a very powerful intro. I'll do my best to live up to it.
I know you will, because we had coffee recently. And our conversation was nonstop for like an hour and a half. We could have sat for longer.
Yes, true.
We were so engaged. So the reason that we connected is because I have been giving you referrals for probably 10 years at least. And I would tell my clients, if they were in a separation or divorce, if you want to do mediation, you should call The Way Mediation.
Yes.
But we had never actually met or connected. I just heard about how great you were. So I actually called you and said, hey, we need to have a coffee.
Yes.
So the interesting part was when we met, the very first thing you did was explain conflict to me, because I ordered coffee and you ordered tea, and you said that could be seen as a form of conflict.
Yeah, sure.
Tell me, what does conflict mean?
Yeah, conflict. Any time that two separate, divergent ideas meet, I call that conflict. Some of us in the field of mediation will have different definitions. But essentially, whenever there's a dispute or different ideas or goals, there can be a dance, which is the business I'm in, is the dancing business in terms of conflict resolution. Or there can be a clash or a war. And that's what you're trying to resolve or avoid in this process. Yeah,
I think in this world right now, we need more Tiagos.
We do. We need more peacemakers. Yes,
definitely. Peacemakers is where we need to go to. Yeah. So then, explain to me, what is the definition of mediation? Why would people come to you?
Yeah. So mediation is an alternative form of dispute resolution. So alternative to traditional forms like litigation or court-based resolutions. Or arbitration. All of those three and others take the decision away from the control of the disputants, of the people having the conflict. Mediation, however, has a facilitator who remains neutral and does not make decisions. My job, for example, would be to de-escalate conflict, make sure that conversations are productive and constructive, but empowers the parties to make decisions themselves. So,
right.
Yeah.
So I read something on your Instagram or on your website, and it said, Tiago believes that all people are imperfect, including the mediator.
Yeah.
Yet they are worthy of dignity and having a voice in the process. Tiago considers it a privilege to work with those who choose peace over an adversarial process to resolving disputes. And it brought me back to people separating and divorcing, and how this war that we've decided we must have. They hire lawyers, and they're spending $50,000, $60,000 of their hard-earned money to pay for these lawyers. And tell me how you can support somebody without going through the whole part of paying the lawyers, the big fees.
Yeah. There's a lot there. In fact, you mentioned 50 or 60,000. I've had clients who've paid $250,000 prior to coming to mediation in litigation costs.
Wow.
And then those cases were resolvable in mediation. It's challenging. There are many different types of cases, but ultimately, as long as the parties want to resolve issues, in other words, their goal is not to punish the other, which sometimes can be the reason why people end up spending exorbitant costs. Not always, but sometimes. Then mediation certainly has a good shot of resolving, of being part of the solution for them. And the key thing for me as a mediator is to know that everyone in the room is imperfect, as you said. I don't bring any judgment, any kind of bias against my clients or the parties. Everyone's had a rough day. Everyone's had disputes in our lives. I'm sure you have, Tracy. I know I have. Mm-hmm. So the name of the game is to find harmony, to work towards a future that is better than the past has been. So as long as people want that, then mediation has a really high chance, upwards of 95+% chance of resolving their matter.
Right. You said something really important. You used a word called punish. And it's one thing that I wish that I could give to people that are going through separation and divorce. When you're punishing that person, you're punishing the family, you're punishing your pocketbook, you're punishing young children that are caught in the middle.
Yeah.
How can you help people that are in that place? Can you actually get them to the place where they want peace, where they want a better future?
Yes. It's been said that, hating someone or wanting to punish someone is like drinking poison, hoping that it'll affect or hurt the other person. So I think part of the work that the mediator does, and it's really great, it's a privilege for a peacemaker to have that role of being able to not only mediate the two parties in discussions, but also deepen on some of the history, some of the challenges, some of the emotions with each of the parties individually, and pull out some of the redeemable aspects. And there always are. Mm-hmm. There are always redeemable goals. Someone wants peace. They don't want to be mistreated. They want to save money. They don't want to go through the stress and anxiety that they've had up until that time, right? So there's always redeemable, goals and pieces that any disputant brings to the table that are worth exploring and enlarging and focusing on. So when I do this work with my clients, it's not so much about changing their mind or convincing them that they should go in a direction that they're not set on going. It's about coaching them, helping them explore where do they truly need to go? Where does peace lie? And most often the answer is an answer that is mutually shared, that peace means saving money, not having this other person you have a dispute with be the center of your every thought, not losing sleep, not having stress-induced illness, which we're all now becoming more familiar with. So there's a myriad of reasons, but people sometimes get caught in the issues and emotionally sort of stuck in those disputes, and they don't know how to get out. So that's what a mediator focuses on.
Right. I think that what's really important here is that you're not just helping people get unstuck from their stories of how this person's hurt me and harmed me and my future, but you're actually helping the family.
Yeah.
Like, how big is that's you're impacting thousands of people's lives by helping them find a way that's more peaceful.
Yeah. We like to say that the process of mediation, especially on the family side, is child-centric in the way that it is to protect and to uphold the children's best interests. I have so many clients who mention to me, my parents went through separation years ago and divorce, and I don't want to repeat some of the patterns that I lived through as a child. I hear this time and time again. It's a pattern in the work that I do. And so in my own meeting room, I always have the children's names in large font and the parents' names written below in small font. And that's to help them see sort of the proportionality of who's important here. The most important people in the room are not in the room if there are children involved. So that's just one small piece, but you're right. There's parents, there's sometimes common friends that are asked to pick sides. There's all kinds of relationships that get broken if conflict isn't resolved well. So it's win-win for the parties and for their people connected to them, family, friends, coworkers.
Right. I went through separation, divorce. And I guess I can say that I'm pretty proud of how it all turned out. Like, my ex-husband still comes. We talked about this. My ex-husband still comes to family dinners. He still comes to Thanksgiving. He comes to Christmas. These are my children's dad. Yeah. And now that I have grandchildren, he wants to be in those special moments. And I know that that's not for everybody, and people are not always going to get to that point. But how great would the world be if we actually had these blended families and we didn't have the stress of the child's got to go here and has to go there. So tell me, when you're helping people with a separation, like we talked about when we had lunch, the separation is like it's an agreement that they can just follow, but it's not, is it a legally binding document?
Yeah. Good question. So first of all, commendable that your relationship with your ex is, as you described, Tracy. That's really great. On the other side of that spectrum are sometimes families where, a child gets married years later and parents are saying, I won't attend, or I'll be at the opposite end of the room, and so on and so forth. And I want to be cautious that, I'm not there to judge what the future relationship is going to look like. I'm merely recognizing that choosing a harmonious path with somebody you've had a conflict with or a separation from tends to bring lots of advantages to the future, and that's what you mentioned.
So let's just stop one second there. You said something really important, like you could actually help the bride and groom get their families at a wedding and make it about the bride and the groom.
Yes.
Wow.
Yes. Mediation is not always about an agreement, and I will come to that question.
Yes, thank you.
It's often about conflict, just resolving conflict, just growing in harmony, having more clarity, less anxiety, feeling heard. That's a big one. Between families, coworkers, different generations within families, couples. As far as the agreement question, yes, the goal in a separation scenario in mediation should generally be a legally binding separation agreement. The document, on the practical side of things, the document that a mediator prepares is called a mediation report or a memorandum of understanding. These are terms that you may hear out there. They often will read very much like an agreement, but it doesn't become an agreement until it is signed. And our recommendation, that is most mediators, will recommend that is signed with lawyers, that is reviewed, you obtain independent legal advice, and you sign it. This you often brings up a question from the parties. Say, well, wait a minute, I'm contacting you as a mediator because I'm trying to not work with lawyers. They're expensive, they can turn things adversarial. And I'd say two things. Number one, I know some really good lawyers that do some really good work and that care about their clients. So that's been my experience. It's like any other career path. There's some good ones and some not so good ones. But number two, you will save a lot of money, time, and stress by doing the majority of the work in mediation and just having that consult with the lawyer, making sure that they cross the T's, dot the I's, wherever necessary. The mediator, even if they are a lawyer, cannot provide independent legal advice. And every legal agreement must, if you want it to be as legally binding as possible, if you want it to meet that really high threshold that, at least in separation, it should be the case, you want that agreement to be robust. You don't want to wake up in the middle of the night in a cold sweat wondering, I wonder if, my ex is going to change their mind and come back and challenge something here. You want this piece of paper to be meaningful. And so, so we're working in that direction. So I will certainly share lots of legal information with my clients. We'll talk about things like, support, child support, spousal support, property division. We'll speak about them in very precise ways. We'll deal with financial disclosures, all of the components of a sound agreement, and ultimately then finalize with lawyers. And then they have an agreement that allows them to, like I said, sleep at night. So the goal in mediation is that. Although I have sometimes cases where parents say, look, we have a dispute about how to raise or how to co-parent our children. We don't know we're kind of stuck. Can we get your help? Absolutely. And so that doesn't necessarily result in an agreement. It still benefits the family. I will say one last thing on this great question, Tracy, is that the agreement, although the piece of paper is important, what I find time and time again is that the interaction, the conversations that are had in mediation, and oftentimes parties don't even know what they should be discussing, are by far the most powerful piece of a separation mediation process. So in other words, the piece of paper can stay in the drawer collecting dust and spider webs while you move on with your life without ever having to invoke it, because you've gotten to such a place of harmony with with the other person that you don't need it anymore. But should you need it, it's there and it is legally binding.
Peace of mind.
Yes.
One thing that I think is really important and that I didn't get before we met is I would have two clients that were separating, kind of getting along enough to sit in the same room while they had me come as their realtor and decide what the price was. And I would say, oh, you should talk to the Way Mediation because you don't need to go to see a lawyer because you're kind of getting along. But one thing that I really got from our conversation is that it can be a big conflict or it can be no conflict. They're still going to be supported by you and help them create a really great agreement.
Yes. Yes. And the choice whether to finalize with lawyers or not is always the client's. Some opt not to. There are some risks with that. They can certainly sign and witness their agreement themselves and submit it. And technically speaking, that could be called a legally binding agreement, but certainly not to the same degree as if it had been signed by lawyers. So the option is there. But like you mentioned, a lot of mediation cases do not require legal involvement. They're just about the conflict resolution piece.
Right. How long does it take to walk someone through the process or have a couple come to you when they're having these situations? Like, is this like a one-off? Is this like meetings over several months? How long does it normally take?
Yeah, I've got the gamut covered. So I have cases where it's a one and done. We do individual intakes and then have one meeting and the issue gets resolved. And then I have cases that do last over 12 months. Now, I want to make clear that those cases would have lasted longer if they were in a court scenario or in litigation. Most likely, they can be challenging. Sometimes life gets in the way too, and parties must sort of delay the process a little bit. But the average case is just a few weeks. And the mediator should really be working themselves out of a job. So this is not therapy. This is a process of also equipping the parties with skills and tools so that they don't need to always come back. So my job is to always reduce billable hours, make sure that the issues are resolved and covered, but we're not necessarily extending it beyond what it needs to be.
Right. Well, explain to me what kind of skills would you give a couple that comes in? Are we talking about humility, listening?
Yeah.
Gratitude? What are we talking about in terms of a skill?
All of the above and many more.
Okay, give me a couple.
Yeah, so sometimes I'll share a model. I'll do what I call letting my clients look behind the curtain of my work. And so, for example, and I think I can share this with the audience that, conflict often falls on this template. Every conflict you've ever seen or been a part of will likely fit somewhere in this. And so there's a set of facts, okay, at the top here. And then from those set of facts, there are two stories that are formed. Okay, so my story is I was driving down the road and some person cut me off out of nowhere. I got on the horn. Maybe I said some unkindly things under my breath, or maybe not under my breath, but that's my version. That person is a villain. I am the victim, and so on. That's my story. The other person has a different story. They have a very ill parent in the hospital, and they haven't slept for a week. They're trying to make their way down there, and they're distracted, and they were apologetic when they did that. But they're generally a good driver. That's their story. Now, from those stories, so facts, stories, emotions. So those stories sort of create emotions on both sides. So in the example I just gave, I could feel really, offended and upset and angry. The other person could feel, maybe a little shame or guilt or also upset. Now, those emotions, they're the ones that meet in the middle and create conflict. So by sharing this kind of model, if you will, with my clients, they begin, you can see the wheels turning and they can think, oh, that argument we had the other day, it was facts, stories, emotions, conflict. And I like to say that conflict is a good thing. Conflict is good. It's how we handle it that can be a problem. Okay, so some of my colleagues, my highly esteemed colleagues, will say conflict is bad. So it's a matter of semantics, I think. People look at it from different perspectives. But I like to think of conflict as a good thing, a reason to learn and be curious and find greater harmony. But yeah, so that would be one, for example, one tool or one model that I might share with my clients, so that next time they're at odds with each other, they might draw upon that and say, okay, what's your story? Tell me about your story, because I'm not part of the work that the mediator does is deepening and exposing these stories, so that then there's curiosity and there's compassion and there's a willingness, a goodwill towards resolving things. When we think that the other person is the villain, when we think that our story is the facts, when we equate the story with the facts, then we get into trouble.
Wow. That's a really awesome way of breaking it down and even helping somebody else that's listening today that's in conflict with their spouse.
Yeah.
Imagine thinking, oh, well, not thinking, but what's their story, but actually asking them what their story is and being able to slow down your response enough that you could actually handle that. Because you'd have to slow your response down to be able to think about that model and think about the impact that it's having on the other person, and then what's the conflict and how do we resolve this.
That's right. And the beauty of it is that you can hang on to your story and still listen to the other person's story. But we live in a world where most of us go about our lives in that if there's some conflict, if there's a different position that we have on anything, whether it's politics or religion or anything else, we think, well, for my story to be true, for me to hang on to my story rather, then I must prove the other story wrong. And that's unhelpful, to say the least. So time and time again, what I work through with my clients is their ability to own it, to keep their story close to them, to share it, but to not have to give it up in order to understand and listen to the other person's story. When that dance happens well, wonderful things happen.
You know, I was just, Cheryl, our friend, was here just at the last podcast, and we were talking about stories and facts and how the stories get jumbled in our mind, and we actually start to think that story's true. But if we can actually just sit back and go, oh, that's my story.
Right.
What impact would that actually have on the family if mom and dad communicated at that level? What would the kids learn about communicating with? Because we have a big challenge in this world with communication right now. Everybody's so angry. Look at social media.
Yes.
People are behind their screens just saying whatever they want. They're creating conflict.
Right.
They're creating misinformation. What do you think about what's going on in this world right now?
Yeah, it's tough. So obviously as a peacemaker, I'm biased towards listening, understanding, collaborating, seeking peace, being curious about what my adversary might believe or think. But it still requires work. So I don't want people listening to feel that, oh, wow, that guy there sounds like this comes easy to him. It's work that all of us must do. Our innate tendency is if I have a certain position on an issue, I'm going to seek other voices, loud voices, aggressive voices that agree with my position, that disprove my opponent's view of things. And there's a comfort in that. We call that echo chambers, right? So there's a comfort in that. That's confirmation bias as well, as another term, is to seek only the information that confirms what we believe and to disregard information or data or voices that challenge what we believe because it feels uncertain. So I'd say that there's a better way. There's a third way of doing this, and that is hold on to your view, but hold it loosely, right? Because it evolves. I don't know about you, but I don't believe everything I believed 30 years ago, for example.
Could we? No, how could we? We've evolved.
Right.
Yeah.
And so hold on to that, but then stay curious. You don't have to give that up. So the message from me on this would be listening to someone else who disagrees with you is not the same as having to give up your view and your belief of things. And so the impact on the world, Tracy, tremendous. If I may say so myself, tremendous. I mean, I get to see it with the families and the people, individuals that I work with, but the world needs more of it for sure.
Right. You just reminded me of what I see in the world right now as a grip. Is people gripping, holding on to their stories, holding on to their own narrative, and finding people that agree with them, whether it's, the news, certain news channels or whatever it is that find people that are agreeing to that. I will remember this, loosening the grip.
Yeah.
Loosening the grip and allowing whatever story it is that you have to be held, like almost tenderly, like
Yes.
there's my story and I'm going to
Yes.
hold it. But I'm also going to be more open to other people's perspectives or opinions, because it's really easy on social media right now to go delete. I'm just going to delete that person because I don't believe what they're saying. I think they're crazy. Just starting to delete. But I love the part about being curious, staying curious, and staying engaged. That there isn't. Why do they feel this way?
Yeah.
What is it that draws them to it? What's their past experience like that they're drawn to gripping onto this story? So, because we all have our own past unique opportunities.
You're so right. You're so right. And we tend to engage with people on the tip of the iceberg items. So we talk about and we disagree on positions. For example, someone might be this is going to sound this is going to hurt some people maybe, but LA Dodgers versus Blue Jays. If you're talking to an LA Dodgers fan, they're for the Dodgers and they're very elated at this moment when they beat the Jays in extended Game 7 of the World Series. A Jays fan is going to disagree and have their own points of view. That's the tip of the iceberg. But what's underneath there for each of those? And when we deep dive in those, from those positions down to their interests and to the foundation of those things, you'll find a lot of commonality. For example, a Blue Jays fan and a Dodgers fan might both have same childhood experiences of playing ball with their grandpa, of having memories watching the game with their parents or their home and having chips and guacamole or, no, I think that's the Super Bowl, but whatever snack. And those are the things in our childhoods, in our past experiences that lead us sometimes to have views such as the ones we have. But then we argue based on the view, but we seldom ever go down and say, hey, Dodgers fan, tell me a little bit about why baseball is so important to you. And you're going to find that if you do that, you're going to find a ton of commonalities, a ton of material with which to build mutuality and harmony. And so conflict resolution is a lot of this, a lot of deepening from positions to interests and helping people get there and then make their own decisions, empowering them.
Well, I'm glad you used that example rather than politics right now, because that would be a whole new gamut.
Yeah, that's a whole other podcast.
It really is.
But a lot of what I've been saying applies still. There are reasons why the villain in our own view, the person who disagrees politically with what we might believe, they generally have benign foundations to their positions that you may consider egregious. So we may think believing that, whatever that may be, is absolutely wrong, inexcusable. Right? So pick your politician of choice that you love to hate. That person has a position on something that you disagree vehemently with. At the core of that, if we allow ourselves to go there, there's likely something that you'd likely find some commonality with. Okay, I'll try not to be too specific because it can be quite controversial, but the idea is people are usually trying to do the right thing. Now, this is not to excuse bad behavior. I want to be cautious because some people listening may think, okay, so you're saying there's never a villain then. That's not true. What I'm saying is that the villain rarely believes that they're doing something villainous. And understanding what they're trying to accomplish can only help us. Right? So even if we disagree, even if we disown, even if we must have consequences for somebody's choices or actions or words, it still would benefit us all to try to understand what's the good that they're trying to accomplish. And there's likely some, even if they're misguided, even if they're wrong.
Glad I asked that question. I wasn't going to, but that really puts a lot of things in perspective, especially in this day and age when everything just seems so overwhelming and crazy, and everybody's talking politics that never talked politics before, right?
Yeah.
So thank you for that. Let's talk about the workplace, because we talked about even brides and grooms, separation and divorces. There's like workplace opportunities for you to actually support, help people that are holding or gripping onto their own perspectives.
Yeah, wherever there are people, there's conflict, Tracy.
True.
Okay. And sometimes that conflict is not identified. If you work somewhere and you feel there's never been conflict there, it's probably been misidentified or not acknowledged. But yes, so workplaces are interesting, unique places, but they're like a family in many ways. You spend more time with your coworkers often than you do with your significant other. So it's key. The other advantage with conflict resolution in the workplace is that it oftentimes translates into profit and revenue and harmony and less stress and less turnover of personnel. And so they're tangible. This is not just about, getting along better with your coworkers, which is a nice idea. It's about productivity. It's about accomplishing more with less. So your boss is not just an ass.
He could be, but let's just assume that he's not. And let's just assume that we have a story around our boss. How can we use the example that you gave us earlier about our boss?
Yeah, you used the word perspective a couple of minutes ago.
Yeah.
And I would say that a lot of this work centers around perspective. Let's look at this issue from over here. Okay, your perspective is really valued. Now allow me to take us over here and let's look at this from here. What's happening? Why is this happening? So yes, understanding why the so-called boulders in the road. This is a term sometimes used in workplace mediation, which is everyone's had a job where there's a difficult person. Right, and then that's the so-called boulder in the road. You try to drive around this person. You try to avoid them, and oftentimes that's not the way to deal with the boulder, the so-called boulder in the road. So, yes, there's many different ways to explore what's happening to try to assess what ideas, structures, and behaviors are happening. And on that, so if you picture a pyramid with behaviors, usually most of us recognize conflict or some dysfunction in the workplace at the behavior level. But behaviors almost always occur, especially when they're continuous behaviors, because of structures that are set in place. And those structures, which is the next level above, are there because of ideas. So usually there are ideas that form philosophies, protocols, if you will, that result in structures being put in place. Okay, and I don't want to get too granular, but the idea that you have a philosophy, a mission, vision, and so those kinds of ideas, and then you go into structures as who does what at work and how is communication handled and what are the protocols and structures in place. And then there are behaviors. For example, the water cooler gossip, right? That could be unhelpful. Sometimes it's just, de-stressing or just conversation. But sometimes gossip in the workplace can spell trouble. And so usually it's the ideas that are actually setting in motion structures that are allowing for these behaviors to continue to happen. And what I find time and time again is that workplace bad behavior doesn't exist in a vacuum. And so if you try to just address the behavior without looking at the other two levels of this pyramid, usually you'll find fruitless results. So that's some insight on that.
That's interesting. So do you think the boulder knows they're a boulder?
You know what? Oftentimes they do, but other people don't think they do. So I don't want to generalize fully, but yes, when I have meetings one-on-one, typically as a mediator, I would want to meet with different stakeholders and employees and people that are part of the environment. Oftentimes they are carrying this burden of sensing at the very least that something is wrong, that they're treated differently, that they're finding it more difficult to navigate the work environment. What I find with others oftentimes is that they think that the boulder's completely oblivious, because if they were not, why would they continue to be so difficult, right? So yes, so not always, but most of the time I would say yes, they have some awareness.
Sometimes the boulder is more, it's their personality. It's their a high, what I call a gold, where the rules have to be followed. So they're actually following the rules. And then you've got the other people running around not thinking the rules are important. So it's interesting in workplaces. And I think also setting boundaries, like, there should be no water cooler gossip going on, and when there is, it's because there's not a structure in place to actually address that. Because there's no good that happens from the water cooler talk.
Generally not. Generally not. A good sort of principle to hold to is if the conversation happening, if it's complaining, for example, about the workplace, if the issue cannot be solved, or if the person you're discussing this with has no power to change it, then it's probably best for you to raise it a notch and go to somebody, a manager, a supervisor, or have a conversation in a context where it can actually create change. But sometimes we don't want to. We don't want change. We want to vent, right?
Yes.
All of us can have that little bit of a tendency.
Venting is good, though. Venting holds a place.
Sure.
It does. Sometimes it gets rid of the stress. We just need to get rid of it.
Yeah. Sometimes it could be chronic and unproductive, but sometimes it's exactly as you put it, Tracy. Yeah.
So what if you work somewhere and your company doesn't want to pay for conflict resolution, or you just, what if it's not their idea, but it's your idea? Like, is there something that a person can get from you that would allow them to support them going back to advocating for themselves, going back to work and talking to their boss?
Yeah.
Do you need two parties always?
No. Okay, I do
good.
conflict coaching. Sometimes, even in the family context, if both parties are not pursuing a non-adversarial solution, there's generally still a great benefit in people becoming understanding more of what's at stake and of what the pieces in the puzzle that they're dealing with, because oftentimes they're dealing with it blindly. So it could be either just one party having a consult, describing issues. When you're meeting with an experienced mediator, you're likely going to be talking with someone who's had this sort of Groundhog's Day. You remember the movie where Bill Murray goes through the whole day every day, and he begins to understand the routine to such a degree that he knows exactly what to do and how. So a mediator is like that in a sense that not every case is the same. I'm certainly not projecting past experiences onto my new clients. However, it does build my sort of my experience portfolio, if you will. So I'll be able to say, look out for that. Is this happening? Tell me more about this piece, and be able to create more of a crystallized plan for this person to deal with the situation, whether it's in the workplace or family or even or separation. So when I say family in this context, I mean sometimes parents and children or siblings not getting along, sometimes having to make a medical or an estate decision with or for their parents. These things all can create conflict, and sometimes having a one-party consult or conflict coaching can be really helpful.
We did talk before, and I can see this being really important as we keep going through the future, is estate planning and people not with blended families and trying to figure out, what do I want to leave somebody? And there's conflict in the family because the wife wants to leave them to her kids, the husband wants to leave them to his family. There's got to be a lot of conflict in that you could help with.
There is. And this is a lot of that deepening in that iceberg of positions to interests happens in these kinds of cases, where oftentimes the positions is what's being argued, but the bottom line matter of what is really at stake here for each of these individuals oftentimes is not on the surface. And so mediation can really help have those discussions in a more fulsome way for that decision to be made, because sometimes it's a binary decision where either mom gets the treatment or she doesn't, or mom or dad gets put in a retirement facility or not, and so they're not easy decisions to make. But having everybody feel heard and being able to explain their story and deal with their emotions, to use some of the terminology I've shared here, is really key.
The other thing I wanted to say was, you can help estate planning, separations and divorces. What about relationships? Because some people are like, my hubby and I, we're really deeply in love, but we have conflict. How could you help somebody like us get through the process?
Yeah. So I do offer marriage mediation services, and I'm very excited about when couples or families are proactive and they recognize that there's conflict there to be resolved. And there's some easy cases, and then there's some really challenging years-long scenarios. Now, I want to make a distinction between therapy. I am not a therapist,
No, I knew that.
But conflict resolution focuses on conflict, practical decisions that need to be made, resolving conflict, addressing and sharing tools and principles with the parties so that they can get out of the patterns that they find themselves in. And so there's some overlap with therapy and can feel quite therapeutic, but I want to make that distinction. I have lots of clients who also do therapy, and it's a wonderful thing. But in this context, yes, I work with clients to coach them to have more harmony in a relationship that isn't necessarily breaking up. And oftentimes clients seek out my services for validating their relationships. Sometimes people at that stage where they're saying, we're at a loss. We don't know if our marriage is going to make it. We're on the brink, but we're not quite sure. Could you help us have some conversations that would help us understand whether our relationship is viable or not? And the answer is absolutely yes. I love doing this work because it brings clarity, whatever the decision is for the parties. Oftentimes they haven't navigated the waters or deepened in the areas that are really relevant for understanding whether the state of health of their relationship. So I love doing that work.
Well, this was such a great conversation today. Thank you so much. Before we go, though, we got to do rapid fire because that's what we do. Rapid fire. Most surprising thing people learn about, how many times does people say meditation? Mediation?
In the early days, lots of meditation calls. People did not know what mediation was. I was wondering if I was in the wrong business at times, but thankfully people are more aware of the mediation field now.
Right. Well, I was just about to say that, and I was like, no, don't say it, Tracy.
Yeah.
So one word that describes your work.
Harmony.
Good. Coffee or tea while meditating?
For my clients, any of the above. I usually mediate dry.
I have to start that over. I said meditating. Hold on. All the way along, I was afraid I was going to do that. Coffee or tea while mediating?
For me, I mediate dry, just with a little water. But my clients can bring whatever drink of choice, non-alcoholic drink of choice.
That they want. Okay.
Yeah.
Book that changed how you think about conflict?
Okay. Getting to Yes by Fisher and Urey. That's a classic. I'd recommend that to anybody exploring this field. Yeah.
What instantly calms you down during a tense moment?
Breath work and perspective. Just seeking a different perspective to the issue at hand.
Right. Do you have a particular breath work that you do? Because I noticed that one of the things that I've learned recently is about your vagus nerve and how you 4 in and 8 out. Is that how you do, or do you do something else?
So there's different ways of doing it. One that I like is just called the box breathing. So it's just 4 seconds in, 4 seconds hold, 4 seconds out, and 4 seconds hold. That helps, but whatever works for you. But the idea is to relax, extend your stomach, breathe from the diaphragm, not just from the upper chest as we tend to do when we're stressed out. That's helpful.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Something you wish every couple would do more of?
Learn to listen. And I know most people that just heard me there, they're underestimating what that means. Listening is not merely hearing. I think all of us, especially guys, if I may be allowed to stereotype, we can be guilty of listening to our wives at times, and they went on about something and 30 seconds passed and we did not retain a single thing.
Because they listen for the fix.
That's right.
How do I support my wife here?
Or they just get distracted. But that's fairly benign. But the idea of listening beyond just hearing the words and waiting your turn to talk, right? To be curious, to develop your body language, to be able to describe somebody's view or position in a way that they'll agree with. So that's very key. Sometimes, I know this is not very rapid fire, but it's
I like
key.
this. This
It's
is better than rapid fire.
I think in a dispute, we fall into the trap of pigeonholing our adversary into a view that they won't agree with. But we're saying, no, if you are of this political ilk, for example, then you're one of these. And we need to check in and say, do you believe this? And we cannot continue with that conversation productively unless that person says, yeah, you've got me. You understand me. Now let's talk. But what we do time and time again was we're not listening. We're just waiting for gotcha moments. We're waiting our turn to speak. All right. And so just working through that. And that's an exercise that requires work, holding conflicts separately from the other person, not personalizing conflict. Say, Tracy, you're the problem. No, saying this issue, perhaps our interaction is an issue. How can we do that better? So let's hold that outside of ourselves rather than personalizing the issue. So better listening is the quick answer.
No, I think that's amazing. And I think one thing is that as I've gotten older, I have been able to be more present, which is, you can't have good listening if you're not actually present.
Yeah.
So thank you for that. And what's your personal definition of peace?
Peace is, I have so many, but making the future better than the past has been. So any progression towards peace is I think, a good definition of peace. We should not just be satisfied with ultimate peace. If you have a challenging relationship and you can take a couple of steps in the right direction, then that's already peace. Okay, so yeah, making the future better than the past has been.
So Tiago, does mediation work for everyone?
No, but it works for most everyone. So mediation works in very challenging cases. Although sometimes I speak to people who say, it's not going to work because he or she have, a mental health issue, or they're really difficult personality, and so on and so forth. And I always kind of like rub my hands. I hope I can get this case, and oftentimes I do, and it gets resolved, because it's a different dynamic when there's an impartial facilitator. That difficult personality all of a sudden isn't so difficult, right? So, so barring situations where it's dangerous for the participants, it isn't safe, or, one person's just has punitive motivations. They're just there to make the other person's life difficult. And it's quite rare. Generally, mediation would work for every case, whether they're wanting some practical decision-making that's quite simple, but they need more insight, or it's a very, very challenging, long-standing case. I would say that there's a false belief that if a case is difficult, if the dispute or conflict are too hard, that mediation won't work. I'd say that's when mediation most shines.
Right. Well, I would think that there's a certain personality that would be the best type of mediator. So can you tell, like, if there's a young person out here that wants to get into counseling or wants to support people, what personality trait do you have that makes you so good at this?
I want to make sure I answer this question with some nuance, because there's a lot of people out there that may be interested in coming to this field, and I would welcome them as peacemakers. And I do some coaching for York University for junior mediators coming through, and other contexts as well. So what I've found is that there's a lot of different personalities that are conducive to doing this work well, but they must rely on some of their natural giftings. So some of this is naturally what I bring to the table, and a lot of it is head knowledge and studying and getting your certificates and your courses and understanding the science behind mediation. But you're right, Tracy, there is a strong component of life experience. And I would say the one prerequisite from a personal stance is not so much personality type. It is the ability to be in a room with two people or more who don't get along with each other. If your aversion to conflict is so great that you can't find comfort in a space where two people are really at odds, then I'd say, consider exploring, your desire to be a mediator more deeply, whether this can be something that can be mitigated. But that would be the only thing. Personality-wise, I have mediators that I look up to who have very different personalities to my own. But for me, it's a desire I love people. I love people who are different from me, who have different beliefs, who have different life experiences. And I've always done that. I've always been that way since before embarking on this journey in this field. So that to me is a key thing for me. I have this, what we call in our field, unconditional positive regard for people. One of the questions I get often is, man, it must be really tough. What about when you get some really difficult people? You know what? I think we've all been difficult at times. We've all done things, said and thought things that we'd like to take back. And so what they need from their mediator at that time is not judgment. It's somebody to help them navigate this in the most harmonious way possible. So it's a passion, it's a calling for me.
Well, a lot of people would be just so attached to their story or attached to winning, but you have to really be in a win-win mindset where you want both parties to feel like they've won something.
Yeah, you're right. And I'd say that for those who do not have that so-called punitive intent, they are okay. They might come in not caring about the other person winning, but it's not too hard to get two or more individuals or parties to come to a place of, okay, as long as I get something that out of this that is positive, that I consider a win, then generally it's not a bad thing if you do too, especially if the relationship is going to be ongoing. Because you don't want to have a person that's embittered, that's feeling resentful of you and your so-called win, right? So win-win resolutions are much better than win-lose resolutions, for sure.
Right. Well, Tiago, thank you for bringing such grounded insight and empathy to today's conversation.
My pleasure.
If you're facing conflict at home, at work, or in your relationships, the Way Mediation might be the support you need. We'll link to Tiago's contact information and website in the show notes. Tiago, can you tell us where to find you?
Yes, thewaymediation.com. That would be my practice. And just look for The Way Mediation on Instagram, and you'll find me.
Okay. And your phone number?
905-244-0728.
Thank you. And remember, peace isn't about avoiding conflict. It's about learning how to move through it with intention. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tracy.
Woo!